Good morning, Flagler. The doctors are in. I'm Dr. Scott Cleos.
And I'm Dr. Andrea Cleos.
And we are here once again to talk about your health and health issues right here in Flagler, Volusia, and St. Johns County. Andrew and I were watching an awesome movie the other day that was referred to us by, of all people, our accountant. And he knows how Andrea is all into, natural foods and growing your own foods and how horrible glyphosate is. Turns out she was 100% right. They've now got movies out about this stuff. Why didn't you make a movie about it like 10 years ago?
Now, this is actually even a better movie because for all those people who don't want to believe in global warming, as much as the earth is growing and all the people on the earth and all the animals are growing, it does impact the earth. And whether the earth naturally goes through cycles of warming, we're accelerating that, and there are things that we can do to prevent it. And one of the things is understanding the dynamics of how plants impact and help the earth.
Yeah, so we saw this movie, and it was called Kiss the Ground. That was the one that was recommended to us. All right. Was that the original movie
yeah,
also?
And I was recommended this, I think the last time I was at a cloud meeting for Centropic.
And
somebody said something to me like in February. And I think I started watching it, but I don't remember what was going on in my life, but I didn't finish it. And then our accountant did Kiss the Ground, which is a sequel to... Is
it the sequel or the prequel?
It's the sequel
to
Kiss the Ground, yes. And I think it's better to watch... Common Ground first and then Kiss the Ground.
So which one came out first?
Kiss the Ground. And then came out...
So it was the prequel. The sequel was Common Ground.
Common Ground was the second one.
Yes. So that was the second
sequel,
one.
yes.
The sequel. Yeah, because now you're confusing me.
Yeah, so the first one was Kiss the Ground. The second one was Common Ground.
Yeah.
And we watched Kiss the Ground first, and then we watched Common Ground. But I would recommend that you watch Common Ground first. And it's on Amazon Prime.
Is that where we saw it on
Yes.
Amazon Prime? Well, what I liked about it is that, it starts off on Kiss the Ground. You got Woody Harrelson, who is the...
both of them are.
Yeah. Oh, is he do both of them?
Yeah.
He's kind of the commentator, the narrator behind all of this stuff. And it starts off with him in the studio and basically talking about how we're seeing the changing weather patterns and we know we need to do something and, nothing's changing and we just keep going. And basically says, I've given up. Right? And then he says, but we don't have to. There's actually a way to fix this, and it's right before our eyes. And not to give too much away with it, but
I think you can talk about
Kiss
it. People should really watch it.
Yeah. So on Kiss the Ground, basically what they do is tell us about how our government, as usual, misled us all of these years. And they are driven by lobbyists who basically work for food industries and farming industries and chemical industries, and they do whatever they tell them to do. So the farm bill is a farce. That's what we found out, and they pay these farmers basically to go out and grow crops that they really can't do anything with, but they're a subsidy that they give them to grow crops that we then feed to our animals. And that's kind of the whole paradigm. And the way we do that is we go out, and after World War I or World War II, was it two?
Yeah,
World War II.
After the Nazis did their concentration camp.
So we came out with all this equipment.
Disasters.
We had all of these, tanks and stuff like that. So these companies that were building these things said, well, we could build farm equipment, and we could use this farm equipment to till the soil and do all that. So this is the start of, large-scale farming. So what these guys would do is they would go out, they would till the soil every year. And I remember as a kid, they would say, you got to till the soil. It aerates it. It makes it, healthier. And that's why you have to do this. And then they would basically strip it bare, plant their seeds, grow their crop, and then tear all that down, throw the waste products away and start over with a barren field. And what year was the Dust Bowl? Do you remember? Was that the 20s or 30s?
I want to say it was in the 1920s and 30s.
20s?
Let
Okay.
me just check and
I don't
see.
remember the exact...
Great Dust Bowls were in the 1930s.
30s, okay.
30
so,
to 40s.
So that's what we created with this kind of paradigm of farming, stripping the land, right? And basically, just taking everything down, tilling the soil and planting the crops. And that's what made the soil unstable. And that's...
So if I can break in.
Sure.
The soil that makes soil and not dirt is that there are underneath the top layers of dirt are these microphylium fibers that go across the dirt, and they kind of are like webs, and they help connect the nutrients in the earth to each other and help drive the breakdown from the insects and the bugs and the worms and their digestive products and take it in and help connect it to the roots of the plant so that the plant then can circulate these micronutrients. And this whole dynamic of fibers become a web of structure that stabilizes soil or dirt to become soil. And soil is a very much alive entity because it has these microorganisms, and if we liken it to the rainforest, it's like all the different subspecies within the rainforest that make it lush and rich and vibrant so that it can help each other to grow. And the soil has all the same thing, but they're bugs and worms and insects and microorganisms and they're elements and minerals. And then there's these filaments that come from a hyphal network, fungal network, that then integrate it with the roots so that the roots can take up these nutrients. And what they found after the Dust Bowl, when they would strip the land unintentionally, they didn't realize they were doing this, but when they broke up these filaments by hitting large tractors on the dirt to turn over the soil, they're breaking up the infrastructure of the soil underneath. So it's not just pulling weeds. That's not going to hurt your earth. It's turning over the soil and breaking up the filaments, really making large turnovers of soil that is actually causing the problem to the soil to prevent further growth of plants at a much more luscious, dynamic way. So
what they show, and that's exactly right, what they show, they go through some of the chemistry. And, part of the problem are these greenhouse gases, CO2, carbon monoxide, all these carbon-based gases that get up into the atmosphere. They let the sunlight in, but they don't let the heat out, and that's why we're getting this warming. One of the best repositories of carbon that comes on the earth is the soil. Okay, so that's what happens when we breathe out CO2, when we burn fossil fuels, when we do all these other things. One of the waste products is CO2 and carbon monoxide. Plants,
from our cars and our bodies,
our animals and everything else. Plants take this CO2 and they take CO2 from the air. They take oxygen from they take water from the ground, and the combination of that CO2 and water is then combined into carbohydrates. That's what a carbohydrate, it's a hydrated carbon. So you have a carbon molecule, you put a water molecule. That's where the word carbohydrate comes from. And plants, that's their main purpose, is to take carbon dioxide and water, combine them into carbohydrates, which we can eat. The plants can then turn those carbohydrates into fats, proteins. Our bodies can do the same thing. But what plants do is they trap these greenhouse gases of CO2, and they make plants out of them. They make fruits. They make seeds. And then some of this stuff gets pushed down into the ground as a carbon molecule that is part of that root system that Andrea was talking about. And you trap those greenhouse gases into the soil itself. So what I found interesting is that they can actually monitor the CO2 levels and the greenhouse gases in areas using satellite imagery and some kind of spectroscopy. And they show you the CO2 levels, and they're going over a year, and there's a tremendous burst of CO2. And it happens in the spring every year. And what happens is when these farmers go out and start tilling that soil, basically they're releasing all of that carbon that the plants worked so hard to trap under the ground, and they're releasing it out into the air. So we have a repository of this stuff, but we keep letting it out by tilling that soil.
It was also the same time that they were using the fertilizers, heavy nitrogen-based fertilizers, that also create this very warm heat map over the earth during these times of year when they're depositing fertilizers. And so, if we didn't till the soil and we didn't put the fertilizers on, which is against natural ways of gardening and farming, the natural way is regenerative farming, and we'll talk about that in a minute. You don't get that huge plume of of warming that occurs in these different times of the year.
Right. So we might have to break this up into two so that we can go through both of them, because I want to continue with this. This is Kiss the Ground. This was the first one. So basically what they're saying, instead of going and tilling the soil, you want to use how God intended. These plants would grow, they die, animals come along, and they eat the plants, right? So they eat the tops of them off, and what happens is everything underneath dies. That is now, a carbon-based product that gets trapped in the sand that other plants can use for nutrients. So one of the things that we've done, people who are against, the meat industry and farming for animals, we've demonized cows as one of the big contributors to greenhouse gases, methane and all that other stuff. Actually, cows are awesome. If you use cows appropriately, and what they were doing in these farms that had accepted the regenerative farming and abandoned the old ways, they would use the cows basically to eat in controlled areas. They would grid off their property, and the cows would go into a certain area, eat the grass and whatever was growing there, and once that was done, they would let them go into another area. So they weren't feeding them grain. They weren't doing anything else. They were eating natural stuff out in the field, and it was a controlled process. And you're also keeping the plants in the ground and trapping that carbon dioxide.
And as the cows end up eating and passing their manure into the soil, that produces microbes, and those microbes are natural fertilizers for the soil. So many of you who do like to garden, we often buy cow manure to fertilize our soil because those are microbes, and those microbes help digest the plant products more rapidly to produce more nutrients for the soil.
All right, so we're going to have to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk a little bit more about this and how the government convinced our farmers in America that using natural ways of farming was irresponsible, then made them buy a bunch of expensive equipment, seeds, so on and so forth. So we'll get to that.
Don't give it all away.
So we'll get to that in a second. That's just a teaser, Andrew. That's to keep them coming back, all right, in case csomeone's bored with our conversation right now. All right, if you have any questions for myself or Dr. Andrew, you can email us at thedoctorsin@WNZF.com. You're listening to The Doctors In on WNZF News Radio, 1550 AM, 94.9 FM. Stay tuned. We'll be back in a moment.
Radiology Associates has been a trusted name in Volusia, Flagler, and St. Johns County for over 50 years. Radiology Associates is the first and only radiology provider to bring our neighbors of Flagler County 3 Tesla MRI, 64 slice CT, and time-of-flight PET CT in our Palm Coast Imaging and Town Center Imaging locations. This is our community. Our doctors live here and strive to provide only the best care to you, our neighbors. For more information about Radiology Associates, visit us online at radiologyassociatesimaging.com.
And we're back. For those of you just joining us, Andrew and I were talking about some awesome movies that we just saw. She was out visiting our accountant, who knows how Andrew is into natural farming and eating healthy and all that stuff. And he goes, "You got to see this movie. It's called Kiss the Ground." And we watched it, and it is...
He said Common Ground.
No, he said Kiss the Ground.
No, he said Common Ground.
Okay, because I think...
No, he did say Kiss the Ground.
Yeah, because I'm pretty sure that...
about Common Ground after.
The first one we watched was Kiss the Ground, and you told me that Vinny told you to watch Kiss the Ground.
That's right.
Sorry, we're having a little marital discourse right here, but I think we've worked it out.
We're just having a discussion.
A little discussion, right?
Okay, go ahead.
But I was right.
I'm so proud of you. Go ahead.
So anyway, we watched these movies, and they were on... Amazon Prime. All right. So Kiss the Ground was the first one we watched. The second one was called Common Ground. Andrew and I were talking about Kiss the Ground in the beginning, and where we left off was basically how we can use farming, if done appropriately through regenerative farming, we can actually grow better fruits and vegetables, and we can help with global warming. We can actually take these greenhouse gases and put them into the biggest repository we have, the earth, where they are used to grow other foods.
And make oil.
And it makes so much sense once you see this all laid out right here. It's the way God intended. But, after World War II, with all the big equipment that came out of the war, these companies figured they could, convince farmers and humans that we could use better farming by actually, going in with these big equipment and completely, stripping the land, tearing it up, and using that to be more efficient and grow, large swaths of food to feed America.
And I think the reality is the big equipment probably came over after World War I, and it was the fertilizers that came after World War II.
Because the fertilizers, nitrogen.
Nazi Germany.
So nitrogen is used in bomb making, right? Mm-hmm. So, and that's a nitrogen-based product, and one of the things that the plants need are nitrogen, and nitrogen is used to make chlorophyll. That's a very, specific part of the plant. Chlorophyll uses a chelating agent. It's very similar to what we have in our blood. It's a porphyrin ring, and it binds a magnesium molecule in the center, and that's what facilitates photosynthesis, where you take light energy in, and then you combine a carbon atom with a water molecule to make a carbohydrate. We do the same thing in our body, but we have red blood cells that contain hemoglobin, and the hemoglobin is the same porphyrin ring, but it has an iron in the center. That's why our blood is red and the plants look green. Okay, there's always a chemical reason for all this stuff. So basically, what they were doing for years is stripping the land every year, convinced that tilling the soil would make it healthier. And Andrea explained that that's not the case because you're breaking up the network of psyllium fibers from all these different, fungi and plants in the soil that trap, different nutrients and bacterium and mycelium, and they actually use that stuff to break down, organic material into usable fertilizer. So if you're doing it right, you don't need to add fertilizers; it comes in the ground.
Right. So in our backyard, we have a food forest in our backyard, and we really don't add a lot of fertilizer. What I do is we do chop and drop. We have nitrogen-based plants, and we chop them, and they also have carbon in them, and then we put them in different places on the ground that then further break down, and sometimes we chop them more specifically in smaller pieces, or we put them in a compost pile. And then we use mulch on top of that to further support the soil, and the plants grow through that and over top of that. And as it breaks down, and we use cow manure and we use micronutrients. So basically we add some microbes that we will sprinkle on that actually help to help further digest that soil or digest the roughage so that it becomes more nutritious for the soil. And of course, we add cow manure too, as well as compost to the top of the soil to help further with the digestion, because in the cow manure, there are microbes that, again, continue to help the digestive process.
So during the process of convincing these farmers that they needed to do this, like strip farming, they had to buy expensive equipment. They buy special seeds, which we'll talk about later. And supposedly, most of these farms run in constant debt. They got to borrow every year. They got to pay off that debt because of all the expensive equipment and farming tools that they use and stuff like that. The average profit, supposedly, according to this movie, for these farmers that do this strip farming is like $3 an acre, right? Those that have
which makes no sense that somebody would stay in that field of medicine
or
that field of practice.
They get subsidies.
But they're passionate because they own their fathers and their grandfathers' farms, and they don't want to let it go because they feel like they're a failure. And because of that, there's been numerous suicides that they go into in the second movie.
Yes, but
it's just so overwhelming.
So this is why they have subsidies. So the government pays them to grow this stuff because they can't make a living doing it with the way that they told them they should do it, right? So the government basically supplements their income so that they can survive, and they've convinced them that they need the government to do all of this stuff. These people that have then adopted they had engineers come in there and plant specialists, and they said, guys, you're doing this wrong. You got to try this regenerative farming. So instead of actually going and spraying pesticides and glyphosate and fertilizers and special seeds that are genetically modified so that you can put all these chemicals on it, there's a movement now to go to the regenerative farming where you basically keep these fields as they are found, and you let that kind of go through its normal cycle every year. And what you do, you rotate the cows through that. Then go ahead.
They then place their stool. They poop on the soil, so their manure becomes fertilizer for the soil, just like I mentioned we do. But we don't have live cows walking around our backyard. They're stomping their hooves
on it.
on the ground. Actually helps put small holes to aerate the soil, but they're not tearing up that mycelium network that's on the underlying surface of the soil. So you're not really tilling that soil. You're aerating it. You're allowing for nutrients to get into the soil, but you're not destroying that upper mycelium layer. And then over time, new growth will come in. And what happens is there's just a higher variety of crops, because what they'll do is they have newer machines that aren't as big and not as destructive and not as expensive, that actually do thin little slices with seed deposition. And they have such a higher variety of plants that they're able to grow each year in each one of the field sections, that their yield is so profound that their income is like 5 times the amount.
Oh, more than that. So what they quoted, so
unbelievable.
Just to emphasize what Andrea was saying, so they got rid of all the big farm equipment where they were tilling the soil with, and they bought smaller pieces of equipment that basically make little puncture holes in this soil that is regenerative, with the cows and all that other stuff. They plant little seeds amongst the, dying brush that was there previously before the cows came in, and they use the natural fertilizer from the previous year's plants
and the cows
to grow new plants.
And
so now
the plants that are not dug up become protection from wind and rain, and they keep the soil stiff so you don't have the dust bowls, and it kind of protects those new seedlings as they begin to grow, and then the dying off vegetation becomes carbon and nutrients and nitrogen for the new plants that are growing.
Exactly. So what the guy was saying, that when he went from the strip farming that he grew up with and his dad did and his grandfather did to the regenerative farming, the profit per acre went from $3 to over $100 an acre.
Huge difference.
They weren't buying the special seeds. They didn't have to buy fertilizers. They didn't have to buy any of the pesticides. All that stuff went by the way. They got rid of their big equipment. So it was a win-win. It's just hard to convince people who have been doing this for generations that this is the appropriate way to do farming. But it was an amazing thing to watch. And these guys got rid of their government subsidies. They don't want them. They don't want the government coming in, because they said, look, we're done. We can do this. We don't need you. We're growing healthier foods without all your chemicals. And that's what was the amazing part to me.
And we're protecting the earth.
So it's like a win-win-win. I mean, it's like a no-brainer. I mean, after you see this movie, you're like, oh my God, I'll never eat anything that's not organic again unless it's grown on one of these regenerative. And Andrea used to talk about, I'm only buying organic. And I'd be like, Andrea, don't spend money on organic. It's all the same. They don't do anything. I was wrong. I'll admit I was wrong. You were right.
But, the coolest thing is after we watched Common Ground, which again I would encourage you to watch first, and we'll talk about that maybe at another show.
I like the way we watched it.
Okay. Anyways, I would watch Common Ground first, but you can do whatever you want. But the reality is Scott looked at me and he goes, we invest in, we're at a point in our life where most of our things are paid off and we have extra money to invest in. And he said, we need to invest in this because this is the future of our world, not just our grandchildren, our children. And what we can leave behind, that we can leave a good stamp on the earth and put our head down at the end of the day, because we can't take any of this with us. But we can actually protect our earth. And all these people put so much money into space. But you know what? Why don't we protect the home we have? And think about it. And it makes you think about, could I buy containers that are made of instead of plastic, of carbon, of boxes? Because if our things are stored in boxes, we don't have all the plastic in the soil. And then when you think about eating, and yes, it's pasture raised, but you think about the farmers who are raising those chickens naturally. And maybe the more and more we do this, we will shut out the unhealthy farmers, because they just really won't be able to subsidize them because they're so poorly supported that we now support this new way. But many things have to be grassroots when there's hoodwinking going on at higher levels. So I think it's very important that you take the time, and you watch these movies on Amazon Prime. I told my children about this, and my son was like, I just don't have time. My daughter didn't want to watch it either. And Scott and I were eating dinner, and we just kind of turned it on to show her. And then she was so engrossed in it. The next day she stayed, and she actually took notes. She actually watched it again on her own and took notes. And she has a TikTok channel, and now she's been teaching about it on her TikTok channel. But this is what we need to do. We need to inspire anyone and everyone because, I get so passionate about changing people's lives because I'm not doing rocket science here. I'm just helping people stay on track with making the right choices, not drinking soda, because just 2 soda a day kill 9 species of bacteria in your gut. And your gut is your second brain. And when your gut neurons aren't sending healthy anti-inflammatory signals to your brain, you're going to get dementia. And that's diabetes 3. We can help you with that. Shield of Life can help you with that. You don't need to have this. We can help you not have to be on all these drugs and pills, just like these farmers. But you have to understand the science. And without understanding the science, you go back to drinking the beer, you go back to drinking the soda and eating unhealthy foods and the unhealthy beefs. And you eat all the carbohydrates that have been sprayed with the glyphosate and all the chemicals. And like everybody else, you'll get the cancer, you get the reflux, you get the diabetes, the central weight gain. And you just don't need to have it. God didn't design that for you. He designed so much more, but if we don't listen and we don't open our eyes and pay attention, it's just like he said, you can speak in parables. Why did you speak in parables? Because those that want to hear will hear. Those who choose not to hear or choose not to listen, no matter what I say, they're not going to pay attention. You guys, make sure you're hearing because your life is so much more valuable. So much more valuable.
All right, guys, we're going to have to wrap it up here. So your homework this week is to watch Kiss the Ground. You can watch both of them, but then you're going to take all of the wind out of our sails for next week's broadcast. But at least watch Kiss the Ground, and if you have time and you're really hooked, then watch Common Ground. All right, but we're going to talk about Common Ground next week. If you have any questions for Andrea or I about this show this week, as always, you can email us at thedoctorsin, DOCTORISIN at WNZF.com. Stay happy. Stay healthy. We'll see you next time. The doctors are out.